This one goes out to the Artcasters. Ooh, Artcasters! I say you're catching your spell, Artcasters. Catching your spell. Ooh, you're gonna cast that spell. Strike a hell. Whoa! Ooh. Hi, hi. Hi, hi. Hi, hi.
All right, welcome to Artcasters. I don't know which episode this is.
I think it's one. I didn't put it. I was in kind of a rush when I did it. I missed that.
It's okay.
I think it's like 145. I think.
Okay, let me see if I can.
Is it 145 or 135? I don't know. It's something. It's something.
465. Okay, Artcasters.
Well, okay, I guess we already hit 450. Okay.
465. I'm just
right.
editing that. Okay, so we're adding that. Sorry, guys. So if you are joining us, I know that Dylan's in the chats. I know that other people will be showing up shortly, hopefully. Sorry if we're a little late. We have an interesting topic today. I think it's interesting because I have been teaching a lot of high school kids, and so it gets me exposed to things like that artists that are at the very beginning of their journey are like unfamiliar with, that you kind of almost like this deep in, because Scott and I have both been working professionally as illustrators for like over 20 years. And this deep in, you almost forget some of the basic stuff. And so I thought today it might be fun to just talk about the process of thumbnails, roughs, and finals. Like, it's like the whole pre-planning process of art, why artists do it, why 9 times out of 10 you can tell an amateur from a professional in the way they treat thumbnails, roughs, and finish. And I think it'll be a really fun topic. But before we get into the topic, I'll just ramble for a second. So we were late because I opened my computer getting ready to work on, like Adobe Illustrator. And Illustrator won't open. Yeah, and then I finally get Illustrator to open, and my Wacom driver isn't there. So then I try to download my Wacom driver, and my Wacom just shorts out. What were you about to say, Scott?
Oh, no, I had that same problem with Photoshop. Like, Photoshop wouldn't open. I couldn't get it. I had to reboot my system to get it to open.
Yeah, so I restart my computer, and then it's doing the same thing, so I restart again, and then finally I get it to download the Wacom driver. And then it's getting closer and closer to Artcasters, and I'm like, this is so ridiculous. So finally I get everything working, and then I go to, right after I get us, I had to have Scott set us up, because usually we exchange, like, who sets up the show notes and stuff. So Scott, thank you for coming in a pinch, because I didn't want us to be too late. Yeah. Then I finally get that set up, and my sign, my beautiful neon sign that I love, just fell and broke. And I'm like, oh man, it's one of those days. So anyhow, that was the precursor to our episode. If you're out there, I apologize that we were late, but things happen. Art gets interesting and wild, and that might relate to our topic in a little bit too. Why it's important to pre-plan, because it can kind of avoid horrors. All right. Well, anyhow. So let's get into like introductions. If you guys haven't yet, you're on my channel, so hit subscribe, hit the bell so we get notifications. If you guys want to throw in a super chat, I'd like to replace my sign, but if not, no worries. Gary said listening at the gym. That was a total humble brag there. He's like, I don't know, I'm just listening while I'm doing my 50th rep.
You could
with
just
my
change
muscles.
The name of your show to Joshua Kimball Live.
Oh, that's true. It could be Joshua Kimball Live. But no, I want to get a new one. And then if you haven't yet, you guys also would probably want to check out Jacob's Apartment, my graphic novel. Dylan was saying, hi, Gary, getting jacked, I hear. I feel like we should serenade Gary while he works out and be like, the eye of the tiger. But I'm not going to get us copyright claimed. Anyhow, also check out Two Stories, which is a lovely indie graphic novel about faith and mental illness. And then also, if you haven't yet, this is the most important thing. You're going to want to check this out.
Yeah.
Which is The Sun Also Sets on Everything. It's a great album that my band just released.
You always say the title wrong. I have to correct you on your own title.
The Sun eventually The Sun Also Sets was a that was like a soap opera from when Scott and I were younger. The Sun eventually sets on everything. Check this album out. It's pretty cool. It's 12 tracks. It's free on all streaming platforms. And if you're in Southern California, come to Transplants this Friday. We'll be opening a show for my friends, Default American. They're doing a record release, and they coaxed us into learning a bunch of our songs so we can play them live. Because I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but a lot of the time when you're recording, spend like a year or something on an album, and by the time you have the album done, you're like, how did we play that song again? So we've been rehearsing, and we're ready to rock. So if you guys want to come out to Transplants, it's in Palmdale. But at the same time, it's a great microbrewery, and they have a stage and all sorts of fun stuff. So I think we go on at 8. So check us out. So that's it. But definitely check out this album. I know a lot of you guys aren't in my area, but check out the album. It's nice to listen to music sometimes when you're working, especially if you want to tune out from politics and stuff like that, or from all the crazy things going on in the world, and hear music about such things. So check that out. Scott, where can everybody find you after my 7-minute intro there, where I complained about my computer?
Yeah. So you can find me at circworks.com, where you can find my comic book, Young and the Dead. Of course, if you hold off a little bit, you'll be able to get the whole trade. That's coming soon. I just got notification that the single issues for 6 have shipped. That was the only thing I was worried about, because I know the trade. As far as I know, I told the printer when I need it, and they didn't have any. They seem like it'll get here, so I should get the trade, and everything else is kind of ready to go, just waiting for those couple things. So, but soon that will be up on my website. But you can also get my custom wax packs that I make. I've also got digital products to help you make comics better, faster, more efficiently. Like the Comic Maker Toolkit, the Amazing Comic Book World Builder, all that stuff's at my website. Also, I have a Patreon. You can find me on Patreon, Scott Circlin on Patreon, and I've got a new video coming out next week. But if you're on my Patreon, you may already have seen that video, because I posted that today. So you get videos early, plus any of the projects that I create in my videos. You get like the working, depending on what tier you back and everything, you can get the working files to those projects and everything. So pretty sweet deal. Just go over to my Patreon. The other thing I want to mention is coming up in a couple of weeks, I will be at Phoenix Fan Fusion in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm a guest. I'm in here somewhere. Let's see. Wait, down at the bottom. There I am. Yeah, so yeah, you can come out and see me, and I will be there with hopefully I'll have the trade for that too as well. But that is let's see, the weekend of June 6th. So that Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, I will be at Phoenix Fan Fusion. So come out and see me there.
Awesome. And I'm trying out this thing. I just noticed that StreamYard lets us show comments on stage. So it'll just highlight the comments down here, which is kind of cool. So we'll see if that works. But it sounds kind of interesting to me. So cool. All right. Yeah, make sure you check out Phoenix Fan Fusion. When is that again, Scott?
That is the weekend of June 6th.
June 6th, coming up soon. And that's pretty exciting. I can't wait to hear how that goes.
Yeah, I get to hang out with Scott and Keith again from the Making Comics podcast.
Yeah. And I'm curious how being a guest will affect your experience,
I've been a guest once before. It's a pretty sweet deal. You get access to green room, you get your food paid for and everything. It's pretty sweet. I've already looked at my location, which I've got a sweet little kind of a corner area.
Nice.
So that's cool. So I have a little more real estate, I think, to put stuff on because I can kind of move around the corner there. So it should be pretty fun.
I think that's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
I can't wait to hear about it. And also, did you already tell them the M&M stipulation?
Yeah, yes. I forgot which color I stipulated that I needed all of, but yeah.
I think it was green.
It has to be green. Yeah, that's to match the lab coat. So only green M&Ms. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're like, and I want them imprinted with SS for Scott Circland.
Yeah.
All right?
Not SS. Maybe stick away from SS.
That's true. That's a fair point.
Just one.
That has different connotations. Welcome, Paul. Welcome, Jim. Welcome to our very in shape friend who's at the gym, Mr. Gary Hodges. We're just gonna always mention that throughout. So let's get into it. I'm going to pull up here what I'm going to be working on during stream, which is a rough for a client. This is my client, No Starch Press. Basically in the stage of doing art for them, what I'll do is what's called a thumbnail, right? And maybe we can kind of just start by explaining to people what these things are. And if you guys are in the chats and have already heard of these things, it's awesome. But it's dawned on me recently that a lot of young artists aren't really familiar with what these things are. So why don't we start with thumbnails? What is a thumbnail? What is the purpose of a thumbnail? Why is it called a thumbnail? You wanna kick this one off?
So
yeah.
Okay.
What's a thumbnail, Scott?
Thumbnails are typically small little drawings, and I guess because they're not necessarily the size of a thumbnail, but I think that's where it came from. It is kind of. I never really went. I mean, that's. I'm pretty sure that's the reason why. But still, there's so many small things that why somebody decided on just calling them thumbnails. I don't really know. But anyway, so they're usually small drawings, and the reason for that is I think because you can get. I mean, when you're working smaller, you're not going to put a lot of detail in things, and that's the kind of main thing is that you're not at that stage. You're not concentrating on the amount of detail or anything like that. You're just trying to get your composition out and everything like that. And when it's fairly small, and thumbnails, you can work different sizes. I actually I think the Amazing Comic Book World Builder, there's a thumbnail template. There might be one in the comic book Comic Maker Toolkit as well. But I've got some templates, and also I've got notebooks with pre-printed comic book templates. You can get on my Amazon store. There's a link in my website. But so I typically usually work around that size, which is, I don't know, kind of about like that, about a little bigger than a standard. If you remember the old corner boxes, in the Marvel Comics in the corner, a little about twice the size of that is usually kind of what I'm working with. But you can work pretty much any size. But the idea is just you're not spending you're just trying to get the overall composition and everything, and lay out your story. And it's interesting because I wonder if there's some advice out there that I'm not too crazy about. Like I listen to the Comic Lab podcast, and they whenever they mention thumbnails, they're like, oh yeah, we don't do thumbnails, and they're like, nobody does thumbnails. And that always kind of every time they say that, I'm kind of like, really? Every single artist I know.
Who says that?
The Comic Lab guys.
Okay, that might just be maybe a comics thing, because in commercial art, for sure,
No, well, they do comics. I mean, they do like web comics and stuff.
Yeah,
Everyone I know that's a comic artist does thumbnails, and they basically say, yeah, nobody does thumbnails.
That's bizarre.
Like, okay,
all right,
travel in different circles, maybe, I don't know. But if that's a very popular podcast. Making comics. So if they're telling people that, then I don't know. I mean, but I've never done a comic without thumbnailing it first. I mean, and I wouldn't advise it. So
yeah. So I think that was really well described, Scott. I think the thumbnail thing, from what I understand as well, I think back in the day they used to do thumbnails for paintings and stuff like that. This predates a lot of commercial art, and I believe they were actually done quite often at the size of close to the size of a thumbnail, really tiny.
You know how they would, painters would put their thumb
Maybe
out?
that's it. Maybe that's it. But but I know that it refers to your thumbnail. So, the purpose of it is time is really valuable as an artist, and so imagine that you like wanted to do a painting, of like a portrait or something like that, of like, let's say it's your long lost great grandfather or something, right? Very meaningful portrait, or you're commissioned by like, I don't know, like the Medici family or something, to do a portrait of some biblical figure or something, like back in the day. You could waste a lot of time doing a great portrait that's really badly composed, and then you're like, crap, I gotta redo it and tilt the head just slightly to the left and maybe to the side so it's a little more dynamic. That would be a potentially months-long mistake. You know what I mean? And that can be solved with just a quick thumbnail that takes less than 5 minutes. I think ideally with the thumbnail, you really shouldn't be spending much more than 5 minutes on a thumbnail. Just kind of quickly working out, almost like in stick figures, what you're going to do, what your composition is going to look like. I love this. Jim said, thumbnails were invented after Dr. Gregory Thumbnail, inventor of the quick sketch, 1894. St. Louis facts. Also, Paul Pate is telling Gary Hodges that the headband is essential for your workout, Gary. And then it was mentioned, are you wearing leg warmers, and are you doing the Jane Fonda workout? So, Gary, you need to respond. I think Gary's just going old school and just sweating to the oldies, That's what I imagine Gary's workout to be. But anyway, so the thumbnail, like the beauty of a thumbnail is very quickly, very unpreciously you're drawing it. And I think the key with a thumbnail, and I don't know, Scott, if you want to chime in on this too, but I know when I was a young artist, and I see a lot of young artists struggle with this, you want finish. And finish can get in your way with a thumbnail. Like if you're looking at a thumbnail or you're working on a thumbnail and you're concerned about it, you're being really precious about it, you're kind of approaching it, you're almost like negating the whole purpose of a thumbnail in the first place. Yeah. I don't know if that makes sense, Scott. Does that make sense?
When I was really young, before high school, when I was really seriously like, I'm going to be a comic book artist.
Yeah.
When I was really young, I didn't probably never heard what a thumbnail was. But
yeah.
So, but yeah, I've pretty much always done thumbnails, but it does. You can say it takes. And I don't want to. Okay, because we're going to talk a lot about like preliminary design and things like that. And this. So there's a fine line between doing way too much preliminary stuff, like world building, like getting bogged down in world building.
Yeah.
And setting yourself up for success. So while there's some extra steps involved in thumbnailing, it's going to save you time in the long run. Trust me. And the whole idea is that with thumbnails is they shouldn't take that much time. You're not.
Yes.
They're just really quick. So it shouldn't really even be a factor of like I don't want to waste time doing thumbnails because thumbnails shouldn't take that long to do.
And generally with the thumbnail, this isn't something quite often. I will say in commercial art, I rarely, if ever, show clients thumbnails. Like I rarely ever.
Right.
That's rarely the thing I'm going to show the client. It's my way of like really quickly visually getting an idea without investing a ton of time into it. And also in an area where you're working so freely and loosely that you can explore a bunch of different ideas really quickly. And I think that's the key thing is like, like before I sent this rough of this snake to a client, I had really like on a tiny piece, like it's not even a pre-drawn box. I just made a tiny little, rectangle roughly around the size. And then I sketched out with like a stick figure snake, different options for this composition. And then because of that, doing the rough was a much easier thing. So I don't know if there's much we can say about thumbnails other than I think it's a good idea to use. I think that if you're not using thumbnails, I would love to see your work next to somebody who is. because I think that in general it's going to improve your compositions a lot.
Yeah. So
It kind of yeah.
Oh, I just had something to add.
Yeah.
You can finish your thought.
No, go for it.
No, so I'm curious because both of us are digital artists as well as traditional. Would you advise, even if you're a digital artist, to do your thumbnails traditionally, or do you think it may? I've done both. I think with the last comic, I think I did and I'll get into a little bit of this process because this is after I discovered the Slack method.
Yeah.
But the last comic book, I mean, the last issue of Young and the Dead, I did do the thumbnails digitally. But typically, I would advise people to do them traditionally. Just pen and one of the reasons is when you're working digitally, you have a tendency that you can scale in, and again, that kind of defeats the purpose of drawing small if you're scaling in, and then you could add as much detail as you want, even on a digital. But if you set the I had that for that particular thing when I decided I'm going to do these digitally, I had to set the perimeters that I'm not going to zoom in past a certain size. So what's your opinion on that?
It's pretty similar. So in general, I tend to do them physically and by the way, I do thumbnail. This isn't just for comics. Like I do thumbnails for if I want to do a painting. I'm going to do some thumbnails real quick before I invest a bunch of time. If I'm even drawing a portrait, even if I'm drawing from photo reference, right? All of this is like really good to thumbnail out first because one thing I always do with my thumbnails is I try to force myself to do at least like 6 iterations, if not like if I'm working on like a graphic design, sometimes there'll be like 40 iterations just to try to work out, like try to explore all possibilities to see if there's something I didn't hit on yet compositionally. This is the fun thing about thumbnails, too. If you do so many thumbnails that you start to get bored with your thumbnails for a single illustration, I wouldn't recommend that for comics. For comics, maybe you do 1 or 2, but with illustrations or single images, I think the advantage of just kind of pushing them till you're bored is a really good thing, because often when you're bored is when you start thinking about out-of-the-box compositions, and you end up coming up with some really cool solutions that you may not have come up with before visually. But yeah, I tend to do them. Sorry, that was a tangent, but I tend to do them traditionally. But every once in a while, I will do them digitally, and similar to you, I have to set my parameters. If not on physically set my parameters, quite often. Just doing them at a really low resolution on Photoshop. So if I zoom in, all I'm going to see are just big squares of pixels, or just forcing myself to have the restriction of I can't zoom in, which I've actually had to train myself how to do with a lot of art as well, a lot of digital art. If I'm trying to kind of mimic pencils or something like that, I try not to get too nitpicky about line to the point where I'm just zooming in and perfecting and drawing something in the background that once you print it, it's never going to show. That's always the danger of digital art. That's why I used to kind of dislike even penciling in digital art. So yeah, be aware of that parameter. If you're doing it for yourself, if you're going to do the eternal zoom, I think that's what I always call it, where you're just, nitpicking lines, which again, I'm working on a final right now, so I'm going to nitpick my lines a little bit now. But if I'm working on a rough, I need to be able to work quickly and not second guess too much. Because then again, the whole point of a thumbnail is to be quick. And the second you're spending more than 5 to 10 minutes on a thumbnail, you're defeating the purpose of the thumbnail. So
I was going to say I'm going to pull up Paul's comment because I like this. This is a kind of an interesting idea. I never thought about it, but he does his thumbnail by zooming way out on his normal page. I assume he's talking about digital. And
that's
then it becomes
a really
idea. Small sketch, and then you can zoom in when you're ready to. Which I could. It isn't too far removed from the way I did thumbnails from the last issue of Young and the Dead.
Yeah.
But it's but yeah, that could work too. I mean, yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that's a good idea. And even in animation, a lot of this would be like kind of like animation also tends to have like boards that are really quickly done, like storyboards. But those storyboards, like they'll do rough iterations of multiple things, and then quite often they'll use those boards like in cyan or something or magenta, and then work roughs over that rough, tighter drawings, and then they'll do tighter drawings over that in black. Like so. There's multiple approaches to it, but I would say I can massively. Gary was saying I especially need thumbs when using photo reference because how else would I know what photos to take? Yeah, exactly. I do the same thing. I'll kind of rough out my pages too, but like after thumbnails. But yeah, thumbnails kind of help you kind of figure out like what references to take. And that's good for both comics and for illustration and stuff. Like if you need references, it's going to help if I need a car from this angle, so yeah, I don't know. Did we kind of kill that beast, the thumbnail beast? Should we get into roughs or do you think there's anything worth mentioning?
Well, I mean, I could. I just thought I'd kind of mention my process that I kind of alluded to. Because I'm probably gonna use it. This process worked pretty well for me, so I'm probably gonna do the same thing for my next comic. And this is based on Scott Loss' Slack method, and I don't know if I fully understand. Maybe I added to it, or maybe it's exactly what he was suggesting you do. But what I did was I took and I created a digital file, of all the pages in my comic. I figured out how many pages it was going to, based on the script and everything, because I write full scripts.
Yeah.
And then I laid it out on one giant, kind of digital, file. And then what I would do is I'd go in and I'd do the thumbnails rough and with setting those parameters that I wouldn't zoom in past a certain point or whatever. And then once I had the whole thing, I could look at all those thumbnails together in one thing and kind of get an idea of the story flow all together. But then what I would do is when I went to my final page, anytime I finished a page, because the idea with the Slack method is that you can kind of jump around. That it's not a linear way of creating comics. So you don't start in the beginning and go all the way to the end, step by step, pencil, ink. You can. If you've got this image of what your whole comic looks like in thumbnail form, you can say, "Oh, I like this scene. I want to do this today," and then I would go in and pencil. And when I get a certain amount done in a certain pencils, I would take a screenshot of that file, the art file, and then I paste it over the thumbnail file so I could see the things kind of fill in. Like what's complete.
Oh, cool. Okay, ink. That is the kind of Scott Lost. Yeah. I love that.
I think that's what he was pretty much describing. I think he does his in like Procreate and stuff like that, and for me this would be like a massive file. So I think I tweaked it a little bit, but anyway. So then you start to see, oh, this page is inked, and you can kind of see what's filled in here and there, and then it's kind of cool because you get a chance to look at the whole scope of your comic.
Yeah.
So
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I love that. I have a kind of a more kind of old school. I think probably Scott 1.0 version of the thing, where I just do thumbnails to kind of work out roughly where I want to go, and then from there I do a tighter drawing, page by page. So I've been just doing kind of more traditional where I'll do tighter drawings page by page, usually in chunks. Like if I'm working on a graphic novel, I'll try to alternate from 5 to 10 roughs before I do finals. Mm-hmm. So maybe we should jump into roughs too.
Yeah. One other question.
Yeah.
So when you do your thumbnails, do you take that thumbnail and if you're working digitally?
Yeah.
And then say you created your thumbnail either traditionally or digitally.
Yeah.
Do you take that thumbnail and put it in your file and kind of blow it up and kind of use that as a rough, or do you just kind of look at it?
I think when I'm having a better drawing day, I definitely do that.
Okay.
So, one thing that I've found, especially on the new one, because like prior to this, everything's been traditional in my prep for my comics. So what I'll do is like, in a sketchbook, do thumbnails, right, and then in sketchbooks, do roughs and stuff like that. But in Not Death But Love, I went completely digital with the execution of it. And so in that, like you can even see on my live streams, usually I'll start with, this is actually important too, actually. I'm glad you brought this up because now it's making me think of my process a little more. So the first thing I usually do is a breakdown of what I want to see on the page, panel by panel. So in my case, like the script kind of gives a little bit of a page breakdown, like we broke the script by pages. Mm-hmm. But I need to take that page and make it work as a panel by panel thing. So what I do is like I look through the script and I look for actions or like moments that need a transition. And so the reason actions are really important with comics is, in my opinion, anytime there's an action, you should show it. So that means like in a script, if it says Bob wipes his nose, like, well, now you need to show that as a panel, right? Because before that, he wasn't wiping his nose. Now he's wiping his nose, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'll kind of break that down in a list. So I'll number the list, like, and then I'll look through the list. Like if my list is 10 numbers long, I'm like, crap, well, that's way too many panels for a page. Or maybe it's great for a page, but, I'll try to kind of remove any dirt from that after on my list before I even start drawing. So I'll be like, okay, maybe I can like consolidate these two panels into one. And then from there, I'll do a thumbnail. And then the thumbnails often work as a very nice, like, rough sketch to work over when you start to do roughs. So you don't have to, because oddly enough, you end up kind of having to do a thumbnail at the beginning of the drawing stage anyway. So once you have a pretty solid thumbnail, blowing it up to scale and having it in your page layout is really good. The other thing I do that's particular to comics, but I do this in commercial art a lot too, is after I have like thumbnails and roughs, I'll actually like really map out my panels almost to finish. So I'll have my panel borders and all my type placed in there before I start working on my final art. I used to not do that, and unfortunately, like when you don't do that, you end up with a lot of waste. Meaning, like,
that's kind of the age-old question. Like I see the benefit to laying out your type and everything, your word balloons and everything beforehand, because that's a lot of probably some time you could save by not drawing it.
Yeah.
But then what if you need to move, the word balloon around, then there's nothing behind it. So it's kind of like I always do that. I always put the word balloons afterwards and but make sure, keep in mind where those word balloons are going so that I don't fill up too much of that page. But yeah, there's kind of a, there's definitely some pros and cons to each of those techniques.
Yeah, because I can say, like revising text can be a little more complicated, but not. I haven't found it tremendously insane. Like even on Jacob's apartment, a lot of the last minute revisions I was doing, I'd have to do some really quick Photoshop work to kind of make it work. Yeah. But it's still night and day less time than drawing a cityscape where you have a giant word panel over it and then covering, like an hour or two of work with a big word balloon. Like it's just,
I'm just thinking about this now. I think a good middle ground would be if you did lay out your word balloons and everything in advance. Yeah. And then you can always, on a separate layer underneath, you can always fill in that stuff afterwards. But then you still have an idea. Make sure, then you kind of know where the important things are. And if you do have anything extend, maybe it extends a little, but you don't put too much detail in there, or you just plan and like, this probably area doesn't need to have a lot of detail because there's probably going to be a word balloon there, but we can still fill in stuff in case we need to move around. So I think I might adopt that next time. Seems like seems to make some sense there.
Yeah, it's great. And another thing I'd recommend too is, geez, even at the thumbnail or rough stage, always kind of something that's helped me immensely, especially with comics, is to like write out the text that you got. Paul, have a good sleep. Dream of Gary Hodges working out. Poor Gary. You mentioned it once. Paul. That's true. Not poor Paul. That's a wonderful dream. No. I think that really making sure you're writing out your text too, even when you're doing your roughs, is a really good thing with comics, because often like a lot of time is wasted, or compositional mistakes are made when you're not thinking about the type that has to fit in there, right? Mm-hmm. And that'll help you with your script too, right? Because sometimes you're going to have to condense, you have a big monologue and you realize, wait a minute, this monologue's covering the entire panel. Like, the advantage of being a writer, illustrator of comics is that, where you can make that decision on the fly. Like, I'm going to trim some of the fat of this text and make it fit without having to make a call to the author, So that's something I would recommend. I think we should get a little bit into roughs now. Like, what's the difference between a rough and a thumbnail, Scott? Like, how would you kind of describe a rough?
Well, I mean,
I'm making you do all the work.
No, when I usually talk about roughs, it's usually when I'm talking about comics, I usually use the term thumbnail. When I'm talking about roughs, well, here would be my distinction. For roughs, for me, thumbnail is, I usually do one pass at a thumbnail, whereas roughs, it's more of a kind of style exploration concept. So when I'm doing roughs, it might be for like a cover or something where I'm playing around with a few different ideas. But I typically use the term rough more for illustration projects outside of comics, and I usually use like roughs could be like coming up with some kind of ad campaign or even logo designs or anything like that, or illustration where I'm presenting something to a client. Since I am the writer, creator, everything of my own comic, I typically don't do a whole lot of extra passes. And that's probably, I admit that could be to my detriment. My artwork would probably be better served if I spent more time exploring different things. But sometimes I'll do the first thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm digging that. I can go with that. But
oh, interesting.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
That's an interesting difference right there too, because like for me, I view thumbnails as like the tiny kind of really working it out. If I need to try a couple iterations, I can do that at the thumbnail stage, right? And then a rough is like me roughly working out kind of what the final is going to look like. So it's like a pre-pencil kind of stage. And for my own personal work, I almost treat it like the same as I would for a client. The thing is, I am currently working on a comic with a client. Yeah. So that might be part of why I've added that to the process. Because thinking about it with like two stories, quite often I would go from just a straight thumbnail to a page, But since I'm working with a client now, I'll show roughs that approximate well enough on what the page is going to look like. Like they don't have to use too much imagination to kind of predict what they're getting into.
Yeah, if I'm working with the client, I would take it a step further because, and also depending on the type of client, what they actually do. If I think that if they are kind of in the creative field, if they have the ability to kind of fill in the blanks, like understand that, no, this is rough, but I can kind of see where you're going. Yeah. Whereas I would put a little more detail in it than I would for myself, because I can read between the lines. I know, what I'm looking at. Yeah. Whereas if I'm presenting something to a client, it's going to be I'm going to take it a few steps further. So they can see that, because sometimes, every once in a while you send something and you're like, oh yeah, I was hoping to be a little more detailed. Like, well, this is just the rough or whatever. So yeah.
And then a rough, like with a painting or something like that, would be like doing a really quick color comp
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something where you're really working out the pencils, not to the point of like penciling like you will on the canvas, but really working out your details. This is where you start utilizing more photo reference. If you're going to use photo reference, you're going to start pulling those things a little more, making it a little more of a realized drawing. So like a thumbnail is not a rough isn't a thumbnail, it's just a rough drawing. Like that's why it's called a rough, right?
Yeah.
Doing those two passes for like t-shirt design, for illustration, for kids books, it's actually really important too, because quite often you're going to be working with clients and you're going to do roughs of spreads to get approval to kind of do the final. And the difference there is usually I spent an hour on the rough, right? As opposed to 12 hours, right?
Right.
And that hour is going to save you a lot of work if they want to make a change that let's say you went straight to the 12-hour page. That change could be a nightmare. Whereas like if you've just invested a small amount of time on a rough, here, I'll show you guys the rough that I'm working from here, right? This is a rough. It's like the client isn't getting a view of like the final piece, right? But it's clear enough to where they could predict what it is. Like the lines are still pretty rough.
Yeah, that's going to be pretty much what you're going to get, only tighter, because it's not going to be pencil. It's going to be nice, tight inks.
Exactly.
But it's probably not going to vary. You're basically tracing over it, so it's not going to be very. It's not going to deviate from that a whole lot.
Yeah,
it's just going to be cleaner.
Yeah, exactly. So like to me, that's kind of a rough, and the advantage of a rough is, this is version 4 of this rough, right, for the client. Every little change they've made to the rough hasn't been crazy hard or anything, and because I'm doing these digitally, it's pretty quick to like change. But doing thumbnails and then a rough again, like I think if you see artists that do thumbnails and roughs, and then you see artists that maybe are skipping that process, I think you're going to see a lot of, at least the way I am and most artists I see, generally your instinct is going to be, I'm going to draw a thing. You draw the thing, you put it right in the center of your page, right? It's like perfectly centered, right? That's just where we default to. It's going to be straight. Like there's not going to be an angle to it, right? Not a lot of movement to it. And it's going to be kind of stale. So it's like, I think a lot of the time that's what you're going to get if you don't rough or thumbnail. I think the advantage of thumbnails and roughs is it gives you movement and variety, and it gives you your best composition. And also it helps you save time working with a client, because if you're just going to finals and then that client needs changes, now you're talking about hours of work for the changes instead of like a 15-minute change where you can go, oh, how's this? Or if you're in the completely wrong direction, now that clients only build an hour of work as opposed to being billed, for a whole new piece, It's just a practicality thing. But the reason I wanted to bring it up is I think it's like a superpower. Gary said that's true for clients. I'll do mock-ups or roughs. Yeah, I'm not going to show a client my thumbnails ever.
Right.
So in logo design, I'll do 50 iterations of a thumbnails of a logo treatment for myself, and then I'll boil it down to like my top, depending on the client, maybe my top 8 or my top 3, right? Depending on what their budget is. And then I'll show them those variations in rough form, right? And that's what I show them. I never show the thumbnails, because the thumbnails are, for me, they look like chicken scratch. Like they're not meant to be beautiful. I don't know. What do you think, Scott, on that one?
No, I agree. I mean, I'm just in kind of watching the way you're working now with your sketch, and then going over it. I mean, if you can kind of see, like, if you're on my Patreon, you can already see what my next video is. I basically take like back in the 70s and 80s, they had a lot of poison controlled mascots with stickers that you would stick on like items to warn kids not to drink it, stuff like that. They don't really
I'm so excited about anymore.
This. But so I kind of took some of those and I kind of made my own poison awareness kind of mascot. But the process is very similar. You'll see me, doing a bunch of different sketches, real rough, coming up with kind of a look of that character by hand, then taking either scanning it or taking a photograph of the sketch, and then just dropping it into Illustrator, like what you're doing, and then kind of going over it with kind of pen tool and tightening it up and everything. So you can see pretty much that same process that Josh, as you see Josh working on, you can kind of see that play out in my video that'll be out for everyone next week.
Awesome.
But it's just interesting that it's the process. You're both of, at least on this particular project that you're working on here, and what I just worked on is very similar. So.
Yeah, and it depends on the style, because there are some things where I would have to really pencil, Luckily, like, this is a style that I can, go from rough to final pretty easily. But, with comics and stuff, quite often I'll go from rough to pencils to final. Yeah. So it's like that extra additional step.
Dylan has a question too. When you...
So Dylan said, would you say thumbnail is equal to a storyboard and a rough is equal to an animatic concerning animation to illustration?
Yep. I would say yes.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and like even in animation, if you see storyboards, they're a lot looser usually than like storyboards are for, say, like film or something like that, because they're kind of serving a story function. So they do kind of serve that thumbnail function, The funny thing is, I think that the terms thumbnails and roughs are often most used with commercial art, like graphic design. That's just a total standard. And then in comics, for sure. Yeah. But it's interesting because it's like, even in fine art, usually it'll be called like an iteration or a color comp or something like that. Fine art, I think fine artists worth their salt are usually doing this too. The beauty of it is, if you look at like the masters in their sketchbooks, like Da Vinci, right? He was doing thumbnails. In his sketchbooks.
It's interesting because when I do comic books for clients, and usually the comic books I do for clients aren't for like publishers like a Marvel or DC. When I do a comic book for a client, it's for like a company that has a product or a message or something that they want to tell a story with through comics. So these aren't necessarily necessarily creative people looking at these. So, but a lot of it's funny because a lot of the time they will say, we want to see storyboards, and what they mean is like thumbnails. Or when I present my thumbnails, they'll refer to them as storyboards. I think maybe that term is just a little more, because I think people watch a lot. People probably are familiar, if they are watching the making of a Disney movie or something, they hear the term storyboards. So they kind of, and unfortunately there's not as many documentaries and stuff like that based on the creation of comics. So I think people just kind of refer to that as storyboards. So they're really, and I don't like correct them or anything because they're really kind of the same thing. Just different mediums.
Yeah, like clients will often use words like, "Hey, can you make that pop?" instead of like, "Hey, can you make more contrast?" Like they usually
have a little bit of an ombre. I always love that example.
That was funny to me. Back when I was an art director, there was a sales director that was like reviewing something, and they were saying, can we just like adjust the ombre? And I was like, what are you talking? Like, what is an ombre? And then I had to ask people, and finally I found out it's like a term in hair. Like so I guess a lot of women are very familiar with this. Like an ombre is a gradient. Yeah. But I was like, it was a really weird moment of like, I cannot figure out what you're saying. Like, and they were like, the ombre, like, the ombre right here. And I'm like a bad ombre? Like, are we making like a Trump joke? Like, I don't understand. So anyhow, that was just a funny moment. But Chris was saying, I love a good ombre. But what's interesting is that that's pervaded culture from like hair design, where like younger artists are starting to call like gradients ombres, But it is interesting. I think it's the same with thumbnails and roughs, where people usually have different meanings for other things. Oh, what is that fine newspaper that you're
I don't
reading,
know.
sir?
I noticed Chris was in the chat, and I decided to pick up his newspaper right here,
I love it. It's a beautiful
the
newspaper.
Global Dispatch, which actually is global. He just told me he asked if I could send him a picture of me reading the newspaper, and he said he's already got them from like people in Sweden and stuff. So
Oh, I love it.
definitely check out. I don't know if he has any more of these or if he's selling them, but oh, I didn't even notice there's a little stamp here. Cool.
Chris, are
Like
those
a-
for sale? If so, mention where people can get them. If not, sorry, people. You're just not cool like us. Chris said, "Yep." Where are they? Are they on your site? I want to know. Anyhow, so I think that the one reason I wanted to kind of mention this as a topic, which is kind of weird, is I think that a lot of people, young artists, myself included, when I was younger, I had forgotten about this till I started teaching high school again, and seeing like artists in high school. I think I did have a resistance to thumbnails because they felt like, well, I'm going to draw this anyway, so why? When I was a younger artist, I'd feel like, why even spend my time doing these? I hate them, But then you see the benefits when you really start doing them, because you will end up with a stronger piece at the end, and then you start looking at the work that you just go straight to the page with, and it's like, I don't like this as much,
Oh, that's a good question.
Jim said, question on thumbnails: how do you keep the freshness of the quick thumb versus the finished product? That is always...
That's a challenge. That's a challenge. Because
Yeah.
you always your thumbnails are always going to be have so much more action to them than your finished page, because your mind is filling in all the blanks. So the more tightened stuff, it's like a lot of times you'll see, like I'll see like comic books that are fully painted, like and like, even like you could say this about Alex Ross, brilliant artist. I mean, just does wonderful things, but because it's so rendered and it's so, I mean, there's so much put into it.
It's a little stiff.
It's a little stiff. Yeah. So you're always, the more detail and all that you add to your, like, if you look at somebody who works really rough, like say like a Scotty Young or a Jim Mahfood or something like that.
Yeah.
Their stuff always seems to have so much action because it's kind of just sketchy and so, yeah, but the tighter you get, the more you're just going to lose some of that. And I wish there was a way not to, but that's a constant struggle,
Yeah. And I think, I struggle with that a lot. My wife has that as well sometimes, where she's gotten really good at this in the last like 10 years. But I remember when she was starting in children's books, she has this amazing flowing drawing style when she just draws. But then what would happen, and this is like no longer an issue in her art, she's found a way to kind of integrate her drawings, partially based on a critique that she got a long time ago at like an SCBWI meeting from like a Scholastic art director. But the art director was looking at her stuff and she was like, your finished work is nice, but it feels kind of stiff. And she was like, your sketchbooks, like these are she was like, can you find a way to get the energy from these drawings, into your pieces? And my wife has since improved like that a lot. Like she's come up with a style where it has some of that sketchy looseness integrated into the final, so it's got like the polish of a final, but it's not losing that liveliness of line. But it took her years to kind of get that down, because again, like especially with specific drawing styles, it's like, if you're doing like Charles Burns, like you're not going to see a lot of loose sketchiness, but if you're like doing like a good artist I think of that has a lot of movement is like Craig Thompson, right? Like his line has this beautiful movement. there's a lot of like dry brush in the ink because it's really quick and very gestural.
I'm thinking with the next project is probably I'm going to integrate a lot more dry brush. Very different than just because I want it to look kind of like graffiti, and I want it to.
I can't wait.
Want it to look, a lot of action. So there's going to be a lot of style exploration with that. But yeah.
But that's a great question, Jim, and I think that's not something I've resolved as well as I think my wife has. I'm still trying to kind of find a way. I know that on the comic I'm currently working on, the finals are much like they look like pencils a little bit, and there's like kind of a rendery vibe to it. But then if I'm like watercoloring or painting, I'll usually do like splatters and move really quickly to try to kind of mimic some of that movement. But you're right, like there's definitely a lot of times as an artist I've had where I'll almost like my rough more than my final. Just for the movement and the energy, So that's a really good question. But yeah, like Scott said, I think it's an ongoing process. Like sometimes you'll like your final more, sometimes you'll be like, I just missed that energy, and you have to kind of try to find ways to translate it. Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I love I think so I think the hesitation to do thumbnails though can come from a lot of places, and I think a lot of it's just not really understanding the benefit of it.
Right, or not even understanding, I guess, that it's a thing,
Yeah. Like when I was younger, I didn't really understand what they were for,
but today's day and age, I mean, other than the fact that there's people out there putting out bad advice, like, in my opinion, bad advice that thumbnails aren't necessary.
Yeah, who's saying this?
I already told you who was saying it, but again, I mean,
shots fired.
No, I mean, I just say and do the same. I watch Comic Lab; they've got a lot of great information. I learn a lot from them, but take it with a grain of salt, just like you should take what we're saying with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
It's not one size fits all. I mean, you've got to. Look at different people, what they're doing, find out what works best for you. But I in my opinion, thumbnails are a must if you're working on comics, and it's not a lot of extra time, and I think it's going to really set you up for success if you're doing thumbnails.
Yeah, like a good analogy that I think of is well, maybe it's not a good analogy. It might be a really obvious one, but it's like if you're building a house, right? This is what I try to tell my art students to explain thumbnails. It's like when you're building a house, if you just start building a house with no blueprint, right, you might end up with some really cool elements, but you're going to have a very dysfunctional house that you built. Like you might not have left areas for the electronics to go through, and maybe you forgot about the plumbing, or maybe you forgot about the support walls and the whole thing collapses. Like the whole part of design is like pre-planning so that everything has a reason and a purpose, right? And so, we've all had times where like maybe you buy poorly designed furniture where it looks great, but then like that chair is not going to support anyone, or you order a table or something and it comes to you and there's still like nails sticking out of it because it was poorly designed and poorly put together. And like the idea of a thumbnail or a rough is just you're creating like scaffolds to build on, right? So you're creating a blueprint, and a blueprint is always going to lead to a more functional building than just trying to wing it. You might luck out. Maybe you luck out winging it, building like a house or something. But in general, I think like having like a rough or a blueprint before you get going is going to give you a much better time, Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
So here's a question. How does your rough process differ with like a client versus, we kind of touched on this a bit, but how's it different with like a client versus yourself?
Well, again, I think taking it a few steps further, when I'm working for and it's interesting. I'm just because it's fresh in my mind because I just wrapped up this video where I was doing these concept sketches, and here's something else I kind of want to get across, because when I was working on these roughs, and of course I'm filming this because I'm making a video, and a lot of times I don't show that process because sometimes it can take a while. Sometimes it's like, and it, I sped it up a little bit and everything, but a lot of times it's just like it doesn't look great because you're figuring things out, and like I had to be really vulnerable in showing, because even looking back, I mean, I think I put this. Otherwise, I'd show the sketch. I must have put it away, but the the sketches that I came up with were, I mean, some of them were kind of similar to the other ones with just little tweaks, and nothing really was like great, but I was just like, for one, I'm trying to streamline these videos. So, I mean, and this last video took me the least amount of time of any of my videos, and I still think it came out pretty good. But so not being too precious at that's part of it, especially if you're working with yourself. But because that normally wouldn't be a stage that I would show people. But I'm showing people because I'm kind of showing my process. So I just had to say, I got to be vulnerable. These aren't the best sketches. And even the final one that I kind of came up with in sketch form wasn't that great. But when I took that into Illustrator and tightened it up, it looked fine. It looked great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, when you're working with thumbnails, because no one sees them for the most part, you can be real, I think the term loosey-goosey was thrown out in the chat. Yeah. Just don't, you're just, this is just kind of for you and for your benefit. So you don't have to be precious at all with that. When you're showing it to a client, again, you don't want to show them something that like, ooh, did we hire the wrong person or something? So usually you take it a step further and again, you're like kind of like what you're saying with your preliminary like logo designs. You're not going to show them everything. You're gonna do just sketching, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that like, what is this? I mean, I don't even know what that is. I mean, and you're going to look at your sketches and then probably going to take another pass at it. Maybe put a piece of tracing paper over your sketches and go over that and tighten some things up, and then find a few of those sketches and take those and kind of create some roughs for that.
Yeah.
They're a little more tight, but still rough enough that you can kind of use your imagination to fill in some of the blanks. And no, it's weird because like when I'm doing a logo, I've done this. It's so weird. when I'm doing logos, because with logo designs, because it's so easy to take a font and manipulate it and everything, but when you're working with fonts, you've got almost like a finished piece. So I've done something, and I don't know why I've done this, but for whatever reason, I've designed, partially the logo out with fonts and everything and tweak them and all that stuff. But I don't want to show them that because that could be almost the finished piece.
Yeah.
So then I'll take that and I'll take that font logo that I designed and I'll bring it into Photoshop and go over it and sketch over it and then show them that. you know? And I see it's weird, but it's almost like, okay, we're paying you for this sketch, but the next step, this sketch, which is basically me taking fonts and manipulate them, because then I can look at it and say, yeah, that's pretty much, that could be almost a finished piece, but I don't want to show them that. And then it's like, okay, well, there you go. That's what you get, so I'll just kind of go over it and make it look a little rougher and show them that. And then, then if they like that, then I've pretty much already got the finished piece there.
I like that tactic. I think one other advantage of that, strangely enough, that I've done with logo design is sometimes if you like take a font that you kind of messed around with and made a workable logo, you can actually trace over it and do some custom stuff over it a lot more quickly that you can then polish in Illustrator later. Yeah. And I think that's a really good...
I've gotten pretty good at manipulating fonts, converting them to artwork. And then, using the basically using like the Pathfinder tool and adding things to it. Because usually I hardly ever use a font straight out if I'm doing a logo, just a straight font.
Yeah.
I'll always go in and start with a font and then find some stylistic way to take each one of those glyphs and like either chip a corner off of each letter or extend maybe extend the extender out a little longer than normally. Or whatever. But I hardly ever go just a straight font. But I'll use a font as a basis, But to me, that's easier to start with a font than to just start from scratch.
Yeah, and for people who might be skeptical about that, look at the FedEx logo, right? This is one of the best, most iconic logos ever made. For those of you who don't know, there's like an arrow in it, right? It's in the counter.
Yeah.
The space between the E and the X makes an arrow. And it's such a genius solution. And I know for a fact, because I've looked into that logo being made, that there were like 80 like thumbnails to get there,
Yeah.
right? It took a lot of iterations to figure out the most obvious thing on the planet that nobody had done that was so clear and so good, and they haven't changed their branding since, right?
No, I wouldn't. Other than
if they do, they're
other than if they
insane.
kind of change the style of the type, but basically keep it the same with the arrow. They
Yeah.
could do that.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much perfect.
Yeah,
You know?
that's kind of what you're doing thumbnails for, is like to get beyond just like, this looks cool to like,
Yeah.
this looks intentional and designed. I mean, again, it's design versus craft,
Yeah, another good one is the Baskin Robbins logo, where you've got the B and the R, and
Yeah.
inside you see the 31, which they did redesign the logo recently. But even though it's a completely different look and completely different,
They kept the
font,
solution.
They kept that same, they kept that same solution with the 31 in the middle.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, and I think that the thing is, like, comics can be fun, they can be spontaneous, but the thing that's gonna get a comic done, at least in my opinion, and again, these are just our opinions, but it's like planning. Planning is always going to be like the make or break with comics, because there's so many things that go into it. And so like the better you plan, the easier and more enjoyable your time is. Similarly, another thing that I'll say for roughs that Scott was kind of touching on, with like what he was saying for his clients, where sometimes he'll have almost like the final piece done by the time he sends the rough, right? I'm working on a painting like as a demo for my class, and I did a tight rough, right? That's half size. But here's the thing, when it comes to painting it, because I did a color comp, it's like brainless, like in the funnest way. I don't have to like think, what am I going to mix here? Because I already kind of mixed it in my head with colored pencil. Like, so then like I know exactly how to mix the paint, and the painting's going real quick, right? And it looks a lot tighter and more impressive, but it's, at the end of the day, it's taking me half time to get the painting done because I did that prep. So it's like, it feels like you're taking more time at the beginning, but then when you get towards the end of the marathon or whatever, that's when you start kind of speeding up, and you're like, I'm so glad I did all this prep. Kind of like Scott was talking about with the Scott Loss technique too, where it's like, that technique at first is probably feels like, well, why am I laying out like all the paint? A lot of it's like a lot of prep. But then as you start seeing those sections fill in, you're probably like, crap, this is saving me a ton of time, right? So it's like, it's one of those things of kind of like pre-planning so that you make your final art experience the most fun experience there is, right? There's a reason artists like Scott and I love inking, right? Inking is so fun because that's where like all the prep work's been done, right? And now all I have to do is have a sure hand,
Yeah.
But at that point, I can listen to podcasts. I'm not overthinking. I'm thinking a little bit about like line weights and thicknesses and stuff, but that's fun, intuitive stuff, And you have all the kind of labor out of the way, so it can just be like a pure art experience, I think that's the beauty of doing your prep work, It's like rehearsing before a show, so you can enjoy just playing a show without like, constantly feeling like you're gonna, screw up the song you're playing because you're just kind of improving, I don't know. Again, it's different for each person. I know there are some people who really don't need to thumbnail or rough, but I'm kind of with Scott in the sense that I think in general, unless you're what is it? Was it Jung Ji or whatever, the guy who could?
Kim Jung Ji.
Yeah, if you're him, don't thumbnail or rough because you just have it all in your head and you're just perfect.
Wow. It's just wow.
But I think without like a rare exception like that, maybe you want to do a little bit of prep work, on your stuff. Yeah. Cool. Are there some things? Let's talk about overlaboring roughs or thumbnails.
Okay.
So, do you struggle with that? Like spending too much time on a rough or a thumbnail?
Probably not, because I'm very impatient and I just want to kind of move to the next stage. I'm guilty of probably the opposite. Like I said, when I should really probably be doing, 3 to 4 different concepts and I only do one, I'm like, that's good enough. Because, I just like, I'm very much, just unless I specify that I'm going to give, X number of things, I'll try to get away. And I'm not saying this is good, but if I can sell the client on if it's an illustration, it depends what it is. If it's a logo design, I'll usually do a number of different designs. If it's an illustration, I'll usually say this is what I'm envisioning, give them the sketch, and if they're like yeah, but then I'll go back to the drawing board.
Yeah,
but I usually try to sell. I usually don't present a whole lot of different sketches. Maybe I should start to rethink that.
No, I think that's efficient, especially if you know the client pretty well. They have a clear brief,
Yeah, I think it's my ADHD or whatever, but I want to get what I get a stage done and move to the next, because there's so many other things that I want to do. So we'll see. We'll kind of see. I'm going to be rethinking a lot of things with this new comic, because it's just going to be a completely different, kind of workflow and how I want to approach it. And there's going to be a lot of kind of reinventing, like, my style and everything for this. So it'll sort of depend, who knows what'll change, but
I'm excited about that, though. It's like a new journey, because you do kind of get locked into a process when you're doing like a long project, and so the ability to kind of reshift and change your process for the story and also for like efficiency, or like find ways that are a little different. I think that's really exciting. That's going to be a fun exploration, man.
Yeah, definitely.
And then, 10 years from now, you can look at that process and be like, yeah, I need to change that. I'm joking. Hopefully it won't be 10 years, but I think that's really exciting. Just kind of the option, of kind of doing that. Oh, nice. Jim said these last 2 episodes with no guests have really put the art back in Artcasters. Thanks.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, we still like to have guests on and everything, but it's good to know that people still appreciate it. But just Josh and I, because especially with like Josh's schedule and stuff, with everything going on, sometimes it's hard to get guests lined up and everything like that. So, and I try to put out the call at least a week in advance, but sometimes I don't hear back from people, or and I don't want to send like a number of different calls out to a number of people and then have them both, a few different people saying, yeah, I'll be on. So
that's one of my things too.
I'll wait to hear back from somebody. If they don't, then I'm like, okay, now it's too late. I don't want to, unless it's a pretty close friend or something that's just like, oh yeah, I'll be on.
So I was really hoping to have Corey on, actually, because we haven't had him on in a while, but they have like a block party kind of thing going on. But what's fun is I like these too, because I was literally thinking about this today, because I was teaching some artists, and I was noticing like the kind of confusion or reluctance to do thumbnails, and I was like, oh, yeah, that was kind of a weird thing when I first got introduced to it. And I remember kind of hating doing them, even in art school, when you'd have to do like a graphic design project and they'd be like, do, 40 iterations of this. You're like, oh, come on, But then, like, the nice thing about, I guess this would be one of the advantages of doing something like art school or something like that, is then when you see the results in your portfolio, you're like, okay, that was actually pretty worth it. And I'd say the same for like thumbnailing pages, where, when you're roughly working out pages in comics, I mean, Scott, how many times have you had a time where you're like halfway through roughing out a page and you're like, no, you know what would be better? And you get to fix it real quick, and then you end up with a stronger page, Yeah. So, I don't know. I think it's a good thing to kind of consider if you haven't yet, you know. And also realize, like, you know, it's kind of like, I think there are some young artists out there who might be feeling frustrated because they're like, how come when I do a drawing, it doesn't come out as well composed, you know? And it's like, a lot of the trick is plan it, you know, like plan it. And then that's how, like, those big magnificent buildings are built, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, one thing, is, one thing I would also recommend, and also, I just think, I think doing the thumbnails and seeing, you know, being able to look at your whole composition and the whole flow of your story and everything. So, I'm a big advocate now of, I like this idea, like I did on the last thing where I took the Scott Loss method and so I can view the whole thing. And earlier Paul said that Clip Studio Paint has something like that where you can kind of view the thing. And I used Clip Studio Paint when I, to do my digital illustrations, but I wasn't familiar with that. I know Clip Studio Paint does a ton of stuff that I just kind of get in and draw, and then but I know there's a lot more efficient things and tons of stuff you can do with that program that I haven't even touched the surface on. So, but anyway, but being able to view that whole thing. The other thing is always, just refer to Wally Wood's 22 panels that work.
Yes.
I mean, and because you get to see, like, oh, this is getting kind of boring. What can I do to make this particular panel look a little better? Oh, maybe do a Dutch angle or something like that, or not, which I do a lot. I think sometimes just tilting things.
Yes.
Tricks and things that I do all the time are, I'll tilt it, do kind of a Dutch angle. I think that's really effective. It can take a normal, just kind of a boring page or boring scene or
even
panel.
Illustrations too.
Yeah. And it just kind of adds something to it. I do that a lot. The other thing I do is really paying attention to foreground, middle ground, background. Like,
yes.
I'll have like something like super up close, where, normally I could have this person here, but bring them in. And the other thing that does is when you think you've got close, real close up in the panel, it's kind of saves you some drawing, because if you're drawing everything from far away, you're seeing the whole body and everything. And sometimes it's more interesting if you just see like somebody coming out like this rather than a whole body from back here.
Yeah. And
then, so a lot of times that saves time. And I think it looks a lot better. So you'll see a lot of the times I'll have like something, extreme kind of close up or just use different shots from different angles and everything like that. And it just makes, but if you can see all that, like if you're looking at your story, if you're looking at a number of pages together and you're just seeing a lot of the same kind of scenes, that's when you want to go in and make it a little more interesting. Yeah. And sometimes you don't have that full you don't see the forest through the trees if you're looking at page by page. But if you can see your whole story together, then you kind of figure out, okay, storytelling wise, here's some interesting things that I can do if I tweak some of these things.
I love that for advice. And then I think one other thing I would kind of mention too is that's kind of the fun of thumbnails too, is, when you're thumbnailing, that is the imagination part. Like the most imaginative part of probably the art process is going to be your thumbnails, because you're just unrestrained throwing out ideas onto paper, right? It's like a blue sky moment. And so it's kind of like a junk writing. Like if you're a writer, maybe you're familiar with junk writing, where a lot of writers will recommend when you start a story, right, you have your story arc and stuff like that worked out. But one of the most important things is just to kind of sit down and write and let it flow, right? And then you can kind of hone it in later. But it's like that early iteration where it's kind of free and loose and a little improvisational, I think is really important for the creative process, because it allows your mind to explore too. And I will say, along with Scott too, like one of the advantages of doing comics is you'll also get really bored making a comic that has the same shot over and over again. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, there might be times where I need to do that for a story. Like, there are some times where I think it helps to actually have a repetitive panel where you're showing like maybe like a subtle movement that you really want to hone in on, or a really important part of a story where you want to slow down the pace. But But in general, like, yeah, your instinct to make it interesting and keep yourself engaged, I think is really important. And I think that's the way to succeed with roughs and thumbnails too, is like try to entertain yourself, like push yourself past like the first solution. Because the first solution is generally like, let me throw out a generic idea. First solution, if I told you to do, let's say I'm a client and I'm like, I want you to make a Valentine's Day card, right? What is the instant thing everyone's going to sketch? It's going to be like most likely like a heart, right? That's going to be the first thing. Maybe a teddy bear, right? It just, as you keep continuing your ideas, they're going to go from the solution everyone would think of to what you think of, right? And you start breaking out of that like symbolic thinking and into like that really creative stuff. And I think don't rob yourself of that as an artist out there. Like, yeah, do roughs, do thumbnails, or don't. And Scott and I can get plenty of work, doing our thumbnails and stuff. Yeah, so that's basically it. Keyman was saying Clip Studio has evolved throughout the last years, especially in the area of making comics and graphic designs. I am technically kind of a boomer at this point, so I don't know. I'm kind of stuck on Adobe. I can't quit you, Adobe. I
still use Adobe, but I can't. I'm not going to draw on Adobe. They're, I think not Photoshop. I mean, I'll do what you're doing in Illustrator if I want something vector. Like I was watching, if anyone's familiar with, is it Brandon Shepard? I think he's a YouTuber that he's a designer, and he gets like millions of views and stuff. But he'll take like packaging and do his own versions of different packaging and stuff. But and this is where I'm a boomer, because I'm watching and he's using Photoshop, but he's using vector. It looks like he's working in Illustrator. So apparently you can do all that stuff in Photoshop somehow. I don't know how, but he's doing all this stuff. I'm like, why are you doing logos and stuff in Photoshop? But you can see he's got the Bezier handles, and he's, so somehow he's doing vector stuff in Photoshop.
Yeah.
But I don't know how to do that. But so I still use Illustrator for all that. But yeah, if I'm doing something that's that I need to be like a vector drawing, then I'll use Illustrator. But yeah, I can't. After drawing in Clip Studio Paint, I can't draw in Photoshop because it just doesn't give me the line I want. So
yeah, that makes sense, and I think I will probably explore, just because I also saw some of the perspective tools, and I was like, I need to.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just realizing, like, I need to learn that. So I think that after the summer, where I do, this summer is going to be crazy. The cool thing is I have summer off from like teaching, and I'm intentionally not doing summer school so that I can do the rest of that graphic novel, and which means I'll probably be live streaming a lot, but I will say without a sign apparently, but I will say. The Clip Studio Paint, like once I'm done with this book, I think I will really like enjoy looking into that. Although I will say, doing a lot of like painting in my art classes, just as demos, I have realized that I might want to paint a graphic novel in like watercolor or something, because I'm pretty good with watercolor and I enjoy it, and it's real.
I haven't done watercolor so long, but I used to love watercolor.
Yeah, and I've just like just in doing it again, I was like, I should do a book in this, because it's like really like that is an ultimate kind of example of like the type of thing we're talking about, where watercolor is one of those mediums where if you plan it before, it's like spontaneous and quick and amazing. But if you don't do planning, it turns into like, weird nightmare, flowy like stuff. But I love that medium, and I think it would be fun to do something like traditional again after this. But we'll see kind of where life takes me, because I think I have to do 2 stories, which will be traditionally inked, book 2 after this one. So, but once I'm cleared up, I do want to play with Clip Studio, because that perspective tool alone should
Yeah.
be a reason for people to at least check it out, because that is pretty amazing.
Yeah, what I do, and I don't know if you can do this if you're using perspective tool, but so a lot of times if I'm just doing a kind of an illustration that doesn't involve a lot of the things that are like a specialty or something in Clip Studio or in Photoshop, because you can open a PSD file and work on it in Clip Studio Paint.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
That's usually what I do. And usually you can you can go back and forth as long as you're not using a lot of the really, as long as you're just kind of using basic features. Once you start getting into certain things, then you can't do it. Now you can always work in Clip Studio, like you can work in Clip Studio Paint and do your perspective thing, and then convert it to once you get your perspective down, you can convert it to a PSD, and then because I still color and everything in Photoshop.
Yeah.
Even though you can do that in Clip Studio Paint, and it might be easier to do the whole thing in one program, but I find it as long as you're not using any, really specific features, if you're just using basic stuff, you can pretty much go back and forth between the programs, and that's what I do all the time. So
nice. Well, I mean, all of our subjects is probably going to be changed in a couple of years when it's just like, how do you prompt your illustrations? What I like to do is type this specific thing.
right. Yeah.
But anyhow, I feel like we've kind of hit the topic pretty well. I think let us know in the comments, especially if you're watching this after the fact too. We tend to know our live viewers. You guys are a pretty loyal, amazing crew. If you're one of the group that watch it after the fact, let us know if you want more of these just kind of like basic kind of processy things, because it's been a while since we breached some of these just kind of early topics of art. And obviously Scott and I are pretty passionate about illustration and design and cartooning because we've been doing it forever. So I'll admit to there's just times where I just don't even think to talk about something like this until today.
It's interesting because going back to what Jim was saying about sometimes it's cool just to have the two of us talk. And usually it goes like this. Like I'll email Josh earlier on a Tuesday and like, hey, what's the guest on the topic? Do we have a guest on a topic? And because usually what we do just behind the scene of, inside baseball stuff, when we have a guest on, we usually give them a chance to choose whatever topic they want to talk about. So that kind of goes along with that. Now, in the past, it's if we don't have a guest, then like, oh man, what do we talk about? And then that was the case last week. And I'm like, okay, let's just do a Q&A.
Yeah.
But I think this time you were ready. You didn't have a guest, but you were ready with a topic. And there's a lot of, basic topics that, we've done so many of these shows, and we've probably touched. After, 400 something episodes. Yeah, I'm sure we've talked about it, but we can. Who's going to go back and watch that many episodes? So we can when we're in a position where we don't have a guest or something, just some of these. These fundamental topics are good things to just bring up and talk about,
Yeah. So. I agree. And I do think whether you're a fine artist, illustrator, graphic designer, or cartoonist, thumbnails and roughs should be your best friend. And, if you're not doing them, you're missing out on the fun. All right. Well, do you feel like we missed anything, or I think we did a pretty good job.
Yeah. I think we went around the topic pretty well.
Awesome. All right. Well, some person said if you should try Greg Manchess or Mark A. Nelson. They have a lot of good stories. Nice. Maybe we will.
Okay. Yeah.
And then Keeman was telling me, reiterating, like, hey, dude, try Clip Studio Paint. You'll enjoy it more. And I think it's actually a lot more affordable, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, way more affordable than Photoshop or than Adobe. Yeah.
And I love that Chris was also saying it's useful because my brain is made of pixels, which I agree. I'm kind of a Photoshop. I tend to lean preference towards Photoshop because it's a lot rougher and more fun. You can do a lot more textures and stuff. It just feels more like, I don't know. Vector can feel a little bland. Well, thanks to everybody in the chats who kind of showed up. I'm glad you guys are here, and it's always fun to do Artcasters. You guys are why we do this, so thank you. If you're watching this after the fact and there's like a traditional subject you want us to broach, let us know in the comments, and if that would be interesting to you guys. If you haven't yet, check out Jacob's Apartment. It's a story about two polar opposite roommates that fall for each other, find themselves drawn to each other in dreams and reality, where dreams and reality start interweaving. And so it's kind of like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind meets Ghost World. And if you like that kind of blend of thing, then you should get Jacob's Apartment. And then there's two stories. My graphic novel about faith and mental illness, trying to destigmatize hard conversations about that. It's black and white, hand lettered, hand inked, and can be handed to you on all book stores online. And then finally, there is this most important thing, which you should check out. Hold on, let me get back to where I can show it. Bagoom. This guy. The sun eventually sets on everything. Did I get it right, Scott?
I think so. I'm just reading what you got on the label.
I just keep wanting to say the sun also sets. I'm just a big soap opera fan. But you guys should check this out. It's No Saboteurs. It's my band. We just released it. It's probably the best music I've ever made. My friend Josh and Jake also perform on it. And we're really proud of it. And we're going to be playing live No Saboteurs at Transplants on Friday at 8 p.m., which is a great bar. So if you want to check it out, you should. And speaking of thumbnails and roughs, even though that looks rough and crappy, because we wanted it to kind of feel like a Pavement album, it was planned and thumbnailed and all of that. So anyhow, so check that out. Check out free music to listen to while you're working on your stuff on Spotify or music streaming platforms. If you like it, buy it on Apple Music. And that's basically it. But yeah, 8 p.m. Transplants, Southern California. If you're there, show up. It'll be a good show. Scott, where can everybody find your work? Where can they, if they're feeling nostalgic, where should they go?
Well, where you can go, let's see if I can pull this up. You can go to my website, circworks.com, where there's a number of things. Let's see what we got here. You got my wax pack trading cards. You got my link to my comic book workbooks. Speaking of, here's one right here on thumbnails, thumbnail guides. So you can get your own book of thumbnail guides, so you can start doing your thumbnails. Lots of other stuff. My Patreon on there. Like I said, there's a new video. Where is it? There's a new video up on my page somewhere. I don't know. Somewhere on my page is my Patreon and the new video up there. Also on my shop, I've got some new wax packs. I've got UHF. I've got Spider-Man, the old 70s television series. I've got this Marvel Superheroes, which features the old live action Spider-Man and Captain America, Incredible Hulk, Doctor Strange live action from the 70s, and of course the classic Wonder Woman from the 70s. So all those are available at my website. You can pick those up if you want to get some of those. Had fun designing those. Also, I guess that doesn't work. Anyway, Phoenix Fan Fusion coming up. It begins on June 6th, and it runs through that weekend. I will be there. Come out and see me if you happen to be in Arizona and you're going to Fan Fusion. Definitely check that out. And I will be, I'll be there. The other thing I want to mention is this show, the Artcasters. We do this show pretty much every single Tuesday. It does rotate between Josh's channel and my own channel. Sometimes we have a guest, sometimes we don't. Sometimes, all the time we usually have a different topic. If you want to know what the topic's going to be, who the guest is going to be, if there is a guest, when we're going to be on, whose channel, all that stuff, it can get a little confusing, but we don't want you to be confused. So what we did was we set up a newsletter. Just join that newsletter. There's a link in the description. We don't spam you or anything. The only thing we do is usually, hopefully unless we're having technical difficulties like today, usually about 30 minutes before we go live, we'll send that out to you. So you can just click on that and it'll take you to wherever Artcasters is. The other thing I just want to do is thank everyone in the chat for the conversation, and we'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, I need to hit end stream. Bye, guys.
just wait.
I like how I thought, I don't know why I just autopiloted and forgot. Oh, yeah, I'm at the controls here. Okay. Good night, guys.